This is Dr. Thomas Klein, Raleigh, North Carolina. I represent our group JATH, J-A-T-H, Educational Consortium, LLC. We are researchers and we look for the truth in studies. We have 3,000 studies on opiates, and we have about the same number on diabetes. And we're going to be talking about diabetes one of these days because we've come up with some very interesting conclusions based on the data that we look at. We take a study, this is a study, and we analyze it, and we decide whether or not it's worth keeping. If it's not worth keeping, it goes in the garbage. Okay? Either it's a good study or it's not a good study. So this is a study which we feel is fairly good. This comes out of Massachusetts, and it confirms that people rarely die after using opiate pain medicine prescribed for them. See, this is the trick that the CDC used by talking about prescription opioids. There's a difference between prescription opioids on the street, 80% of which are stolen, and a prescribed prescription drug. See the little 3-card Monty there, how it works? You know, by switching language around, you can convince people that you're going to die, but not according to this Massachusetts study, and not according to other studies we've read. It looks like of the first one is 17,000, then it's 30,000, and guess what? Overdose deaths have shot up. It's not very well publicized. Shot up more than 15%. That's a bad way to put it. It's increased. And with all these doctors in jail, all these doctors being hauled before boards, all these pharmacists cutting off people. Oh, wait a minute. It's not working. As you know, the AMA has come out on June 16th with a very important letter that says, quote, the CDC guidelines have caused harm in patients. Harm. We are asking for people to write to the CDC, to the director, Dr. Redfield, and send a letter in the mail and say these guidelines have caused harm and they should be suspended immediately. Suspend the guidelines. If the guidelines are causing harm, according to the AMA, they should not be in place one more day. Now, here's some interesting stuff. This is kind of a potpourri today. The latest thing to abuse, misuse, and God knows what other nasty adjectives are being used. The latest one is aberrant drug-taking behavior. So if somebody has aberrant drug-taking behavior, then what's the outcome? Well, here's the abnormal drug-taking behavior. Selling medications or obtaining them from non-medical sources, falsification of prescriptions, injecting medications designed for oral use, resistance in changing medication despite deterioration, loss of control over alcohol use of illegal drugs not prescribed. What is this? These are people with addiction disease. These are characteristics of people with addiction disease. And if you don't know that they're already addicted, aberrant drug behavior is just another term to degrade and denigrate people with this very serious disease. Okay, we all know, watching these broadcasts, that this is a real disease. And there's about 1 million in the United States, and there were 1 million last year, and there were 1 million years before. It's not increasing. 1/3 of people in the United States get an opiate prescription for pain every year. Where are all these addicts? There were 200 million prescriptions written. Where are the addicts? If substance control causes addiction, boy, we should have a lot more than 1 million. That's less than 1% of the total people taking. There's 100 million people taking prescriptions. So 1% of that would be 1 million. So 1% of people in the United States have addiction disease, which we've talked about before, and it's not going to change no matter what the police do, no matter what the Department of Justice does. It's not going to change because it's a disease. You got to treat disease medically. We're in charge of that. Okay. This is from the FDA's report that we talk about a lot. And you can look it up. It's 2012-P as in Paul-0818, when the FDA looked at a petition from the Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing who wanted to limit the dose of drugs. This is right from the FDA report. The scientific literature does not support establishing a maximum recommended daily dose of 100 milligrams MED. That's the same as the 90 milligrams. Further, creating a maximum dose or another dose ceiling could imply a superior opioid safety profile under the threshold. But there's no data to support such a conclusion. The agency therefore denies PROP's request that opioid labeling specify a maximum dose. It's the FDA. The FDA is the only congressionally mandated agency with regulatory authority over all prescription drugs, including pain medicines. So what happened? It says PROP here. This is 2013. They took this over to the CDC under the cover of darkness, and they got it published in March 2016. And for the past 4 years, it's caused harm to people, which we've been telling the CDC about and they've been ignoring. But now it's official. The AMA says the CDC has caused harm. Doctor shoppers. The prescription monitoring drug program, which came out of Brandeis University, and they should be ashamed of themselves, with a tradition of Louis Brandeis being in charge or promulgating privacy issues. It was started by a PROP member who signed off on it, and another person who leans toward PROP, a guy named Kreiner. They told us this was to pick up doctor shoppers. Oh, what are doctor shoppers? Oh, those are criminals. North Carolina had 4 last year, and this article says that basically it's not picking up doctor shoppers. That was just a cover, because now they have the police, the Department of Justice, everybody is monitoring. Every doctor's office is looking up their neighbors. Oh, let's see if they're on medicines. I sent a patient to an orthopedic surgeon who has a good reputation, who operated on a friend of mine. So I thought, I would refer him this other patient. He never even got back to me because he presumably looked up the PDMP, and lo and behold, the guy's on a lot of pain medicines. I had another patient who has a rare disease, and went down to Connecticut to see this doctor, and he operated on another patient of mine and cured her of this rare disease, but he would not take my second patient because she was on demon opiates. The overdose death, I don't know why they put this in there about coronavirus. The death rate is still rising every year because the death rate is in people with addiction disease. And why do they die more? They die more when there is more control. Staten Island is a very good example of intense law enforcement caused the death rate to rise. Why is that? We all know, right? People with a type 2 addiction disease are going to find their medicines because they have intense seeking. That's the type of disease they have. It's like a person who's on the desert and looking for water and finds some, they'll steal it, they'll do anything to get the water. Well, that's what happens with this weird disease. And we now have genetic proof that it's a real disease. People don't like to hear that because it takes the wind out of the sails of anti-opioid fanatics who are pushing the agenda that more substance creates more addicts. And as we talked before, the idea of a junkie is very scary. Now, I purposely use the word junkie, even though it's a pejorative word, because this is what folks with addiction disease call each other. It's kind of a fond term with them. And I use it because it brings to mind an exact image of what people are afraid of. If you say somebody has type 2 opiate addiction disease, they don't worry about that. They worry about junkies because they don't know what a junkie is. They're afraid of them. They feel they're possessed by the devil or these medicines they take. And we're going to have some sessions in which we talk to people with addiction disease. And lo and behold, they're kind of like real people. Some quotes from PROP, the group of people that influence the CDC and believes that no one should be taking opiates. The genie is out of the bottle, said a member. Unless we do a better job of increasing access, overdose deaths will remain at record high and we'll have to wait for this generation to die off before the crisis comes to an end. How about opiates and benzodiazepines? That's the latest thing. Everybody's being yanked off their Valium and Xanax. But here's an article from the FDA, and the FDA, remember they're in charge, FDA says you don't want to withhold opiate medicines from people taking benzos or CNS depressants. Careful medication management can reduce risks. So here it is. They're the boss. But meanwhile, people that are frightened and are not using logic are just ticking people off. How cruel and horrible is that? Studies have shown the opiates really do help people with horrible pain syndromes that we see and that I used to see in my practice. Here's an article from the New England Journal of Medicine, a very reputable place. Adoption of substance control laws was not associated with reduction in hazardous use of opiates or overdose. Laws don't work. But we pass them every day because everybody's so frightened they feel like they got to do something to stop the being possessed by this devil. Buprenorphine. I get a lot of questions about buprenorphine, which is Subutex. If you combine it with naloxone, you get Suboxone. The government is in charge of addiction clinics, which is not true in other countries. And they have approved of Suboxone, which is buprenorphine double drug, that is, with naloxone, because they feel that the addicts won't get worse, because they feel that it's limited. Buprenorphine is sold on the streets. Anything that's sold on the streets, there's your answer. Single drug buprenorphine, or Subutex, is a wonderful drug for pain. It's a little tricky to use, but people are afraid of the association of Suboxone with addiction, and I understand that. But Subutex is the single drug buprenorphine, and so people should not be alarmed if they're being offered that, because it is a good drug. But check it out yourself. Here is a high-quality study, shows no hyperalgesia. Hyperalgesia is when pain is made worse with the medicines. This is a common use of excuses by doctors. We're putting together a big paper on excuses, which will be out soon. It's not true. This study shows no increase in pain with pain medicines or hyperalgesia. Okay, in the big government studies that they do every year from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Federal Agency, 2/3 of people who misused opioids did so because they were in pain. They're misusing them because they're not getting enough, because the doctors think they need to prescribe a certain amount. We're going to talk about Pasternak next time, who was the inventor of receptors. And he said, this is a medicine that has broad use, broad doses. So when doctors think that, 100 milligrams will do the trick, no. People actually go out and seek drugs, which is really sad because they are basically undertreated. Lastly, this is an interview with John Ehrlichman. It was done in 1994. And he said, we knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war on black folks, but getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, we then criminalized both heavily, and we could disrupt their communities. So that's all we have time for today, and thank you, and I will see you next time.